Let's take a look at operating exposure. Now, from an international perspective, it's the effect of random changes in exchange rates on the firm's competitive position. And this is not readily measurable. So we want to think about it as the extent to which the firm's operating cash flows are affected by the exchange rate. So let's take a look at some examples of operating exposure. In 2011, there was a great earthquake and tsunami in Japan that led to supply chain disruptions. So many auto parts were manufactured in this part of Japan, and it was not possible for auto manufacturers and repair shops to get some of those parts. In 2017, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, which is a large producer of IV saline bags. There was an enormous shortage in the shipping market from Asia due to the Asian currency crisis in 1998. And more currently, the 2020 coronavirus pandemic has led to shortages in numerous products, including personal protective equipment. Now, all of these don't relate necessarily to exchange rates, but you can see that in an international world, what happens in one part of the world certainly impacts the United States or other countries as well. Let's note that the exposure for the retailers due to changes in exchange rates have two components. The competitive effect, difficulties and increased costs of shipping, and sometimes the conversion effect, lower dollar prices of imports due to foreign currency exchange rate depreciation. So, what are some of the determinants of operating exposure? Now, let's recall that it's not readily determined from the firm's accounting statements as, for example, transaction exposure. So, the firm's operating exposure is determined by things like the market structure of inputs and products, how competitive or monopolistic the markets facing the firm are, and the firm's ability to adjust its markets, product mix, and sourcing in response to exchange rate changes. So how do you manage operating exposure? Well, you may want to select low-cost production sites. You may want to have some flexible sourcing policies, the ability to get the supplies you need from different places in different parts of the world. Diversification of the market, R&D and product differentiation, and sometimes the use of financial hedging. So let's take a look at selecting low-cost production sites. So a firm may wish to diversify the location of its production sites to mitigate the effect of exchange rate movements. So for example, Honda built North American factories in response to a strong yen, but later found itself importing more cars from Japan due to a weak yen and increased exchange rate volatility. So the strong yen made it very expensive for U.S. auto purchasers to purchase Japanese cars, so they decided to move production facilities into the United States. See what else we have. Flexible sourcing policies. So we should keep in mind that sourcing does not apply only to components, but also to guest workers. So for example, Japan Airlines hired foreign crews to remain competitive in international routes in the face of a strong yen. All right, it was cheaper to hire foreigners to manage their crews, but later contemplated a reverse strategy in the face of a weak yen and rising domestic unemployment. Diversification of the market, selling in multiple markets to take advantage of economies of scale, and diversification of exchange rate risk. If you're selling in different countries, the exchange rate between the dollar and the euro or the dollar and the peso don't necessarily move directly together. So just like diversifying in the stock market can be beneficial, diversifying in different parts of the world can be beneficial as well. R&D and product differentiation. Successful research and development allows cost cutting, enhanced productivity, product differentiation. The beauty of product differentiation is it gives the firm less elastic demand. That means that the demand for the good is less price sensitive, which may translate into less exchange rate risk. So if exchange rates change and, for example, you would have to raise the price of that product, if the demand is less elastic, that is, people are not that sensitive to changes in prices, they may not reduce their demand much, even if you have to raise price. And last, let's just mention financial hedging is another approach for dealing with these issues. I've discussed this more in some other videos. So that's the general idea of dealing with operating exposure. There are another number of different ways to deal with it, but in an integrated world, having factories in different parts of the world may be beneficial. Selling in different parts of the world may be beneficial. So it's one way that a multinational corporation can deal with, some of these risks.